Hello, everybody, and welcome to Via Satellite Magazine's Future Space Economy webcast. My name is Jeffrey Hill, Executive Editor for Via Satellite and Executive Chairman of the Satellite Show in Washington, D.C. Thank you all so much for being here. Future Space Economy is brought to you by MDA Space, a trusted space mission partner and manufacturer to the rapidly expanding global space industry for more than 55 years. MDA Space's mission is to build the space between proven and possible, and their support of Future Space Economy is part of that mission, and we thank them very much for their generous support. So thank you so much, MDA Space. This episode is titled Nanomedicine on the ISS, Pioneering Medical and Pharmaceutical Research in Orbit. Today, we're going to learn about how the space industry can better communicate the value of space as a research environment for the pharmaceutical industry. And we're also going to learn about NASA's Science and Space to Cure Disease on Earth program, which just launched to the ISS this past May to study a new application for Janus Base Nanoparticles. And don't worry, we're going to learn about what nanoparticles are and why nanomedicine is important. With that said, let's meet our two speakers. First, I'm going to start with Jana Stoudemire. She's the Senior Executive of Commercial Growth and Innovation at Barrios Technologies, where she's working to establish a new business supporting the development of economically sustainable and profitable uses of space. She has a distinguished career in both pharma and space industries. She's successfully transitioned from a career in pharma to lead life science research and microgravity as part of the team managing the ISS, the U.S. National Laboratory, ISSNL, and previously served as Commercial Innovation Officer for Space Tango and as Global Director of In-Space Manufacturing for Axiom Space. Jana, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate having you. Could you, since a lot of our industry is probably new to this and may not be familiar with Barrios Technologies, can you talk a little bit about what the company does, what you do there?
Sure. And well, first, thanks very much for the invitation. I'm really pleased to be here today, and I think this is going to be a very fun discussion. Thrilled to be here with Marianne, who is one of the pioneers that's helping to develop these new applications in low Earth orbit. So we are developing a new company within Barrios that is really to help companies like Eascra to navigate the space landscape and really expand opportunities for access to space. The ISS is a presence in low Earth orbit that has given us lots of operational experience and important discoveries, and we've learned a lot from the time on the ISS. One of the things that we've learned that's super important is, and that's probably the biggest discovery, that we can make really valuable products in space that we can't make here on Earth. As the ISS is retiring and the landscape is really continuing to evolve, we need to make more discoveries. And we need to also make sure that we have the infrastructure to support the applications like the ones that Eascra is working on to help us to kind of open that door to the new space economy. So really, at Barrios, we're kind of the new company that we're starting within Barrios is just hyper-focused on helping to build those markets and helping people like Eascra and others to really leverage the information that we have so far on these new applications and new discoveries to come.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jana.
Sure.
And as we've mentioned, we also have Marianne Snow. She's the CEO and co-founder of Eascra Biotech, a nanomedicine startup located in Boston. It specializes in targeting therapeutic delivery of nucleotides and other medicinal cargoes into hard-to-penetrate body tissues. Eascra is the first commercial company to produce its non-lipid-based Janus Base Nanoparticles in space for medical applications on Earth. In collaboration with NASA, has sent 5 payloads to the ISS over the last 2 years, with a 6th planned for the spring of 2026. Marianne, thank you so much for being here. It's great to see you.
Thanks, Jeff. I really appreciate the opportunity. And I promise for everybody who is kind enough to come on the call, we won't get too technical today. And I'm going to give you a compelling reason why this might actually be interesting to you. One of our proof of concept disease indications that we're working on is a solution to arthritis, joint problems. And so much of the work that we've done on station for the last 2 years has been related to coming up with a solution to osteoarthritis, which has no actual therapeutic treatment right now. No therapeutic treatment actually exists for osteoarthritis. So for anybody out there who has creaky knees or is feeling the weight of their years and would like solutions, then everything that we're going to talk to you about today is actually a potential pathway for you to have a better future. And so that's why I wanted to share that example, because osteoarthritis impacts 1 in 4 people in the world and is the leading cause of disability in the United States. And so we thought that that would really hit home with our audience, regardless of what part of the space sector you work in.
Absolutely. And for me too, I have a mother who has 2, we call them robotic knees. So this will be interesting information to pass along to her, and also for myself as well. Marianne, as you kindly said, we're not going to get too technical, but we're going to hear some medical research terms during this webcast. And in the title of this, we're talking about nanomedicine, nanoparticles. Can you just explain the basic principle of how nanomedicine works and why this is important in researching disease prevention and treatment for, as you said, like osteoarthritis?
Sure. And for the benefit of our viewers today, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So we brought a couple of slides for Eascra so that we can talk to you a little bit about what we're up to and what we're doing. So as I mentioned to you, Jeff, I don't want to get too technical, but we do want to emphasize to everybody here that Eascra is actually a biotech company. We're a nanomedicine company, and we're an early stage startup. And so we're just 3.5 years old. And I think what's really important to note in all of this is that while we are working in a biotech environment, we had an opportunity to really think out of the box and think about ways that we can take an effective product that we're actually using on Earth and advance it even more quickly by leveraging space. And a lot of people are unaware of the real advantages of a microgravity environment. This is really important because from a business perspective, finding a method to be able to take a therapeutic agent, some sort of a therapeutic cargo, whether it's a RNA, whether it's a protein or a peptide, and deliver it specifically to a therapeutic area, is an emerging sector of medicine today. And the reason why it's important for anybody who might have a friend or family member who's been impacted by a disease like cancer. If we can actually target a tumor as opposed to having to deliver a cancer therapy via IV that is going to create a lot of side effects, then there are lots and lots of opportunities to be able to really kind of send a therapy in a new and a more advantageous way, where not only can you think about your medicinal target site much more strategically, but you can do it in a way that will have much less systemic impacts to the people who are actually living with that particular problem, that medical problem, and finding safe ways to be able to deliver things to a specific target is actually really, really difficult. So finding something that's safe and effective, that's easy to produce, is actually very, very difficult. There's not one thing on the market right now that can do that. And yet there's a lot of big interest in nanoparticles. But the current nanoparticles that exist in the world have severe limitations, and they're actually quite toxic for many indications. And so we're hoping to change that, because we've actually created something that is completely different and doesn't exist on the market today. Now, we talked about nanoparticles. Nanoparticles are very small. We're actually talking about something that is molecular. And what we've actually developed, and was developed by my co-founder and business partner, Yupeng Chen, who's a biomedical engineer at the University of Connecticut, is actually a base molecule. And this base molecule, which I show you right here, was inspired by DNA. And so what he has done is he's chemically reproduced DNA in a way that allows us to be able to build structures. This beautiful rosette is actually 6 of these molecules that's been compiled. And then we create tubes, and those tubes are actually rosettes stacked on top of each other that bind into tubes. And then the tubes are then used to encapsulate a cargo. And this is an important detail when you're thinking about microgravity, because when we build these on Earth, even though they're highly effective, they're also subject to microgravity forces, gravitational forces, and they're also affected by convection. So the tubes, when they come together, are less perfect than they could be. So while we've been able to actually build a product that we can advance, we also are looking for ways to continue to refine that product to make it even better, even better. And turns out that when we take our particles into space and we put them together in space, we suddenly create in a much more optimized environment, which allows us to be able to produce something that is, it's almost like supercharged. And Eascra is now, as Jana mentioned, a pioneer in, we find ourselves pioneers in LEO space production, where we're the first commercial company to ever produce nanoparticles in space for medical use on Earth. And ironically, these 5 sessions producing the product in space have allowed us to be able to unlock a whole host of attributes to our product that not only are commercially viable on the ground, but also really legitimize our technology for some pretty advanced applications on Earth. This is important because when we build the product in space, this is actually what it looks like on the ground. But when we build it in space, we can get up to about a 40% improvement in that product, which is really lovely, because now we can take something which is already very, very effective, and we can essentially, as I mentioned, supercharge it for the future. Now, I think what's important here, and one of the pieces that Jana is going to talk about on a broad scale, is how many people it takes to build an ecosystem for a production environment that really doesn't exist today. Because producing drugs in microgravity is at an early stage. It's definitely at the pioneer stage, the wild, wild west. So we work with a significant number of partners, not just Barrios, but a whole host of private companies, commercial companies, academic institutions, government agencies, accelerator programs, and space agencies, both on the science side as well as the satellite side, the perpetual platform side, to really kind of think about what does a production environment look like in the future. And this is important because, as we're thinking about building out a production environment in an entirely a new place, that low Earth orbit, then it's something that is going to take lots and lots and lots of folks from lots and lots and lots of different areas in order to be able to realize that. And I know that Jana is going to talk more broadly about some of the coalitions that have formed, some of the history that's happened, and also really kind of talk about how all of the work that she's done in her many roles in many places have allowed folks like Eascra to take advantage of a once in a lifetime moment where we're really creating something that didn't exist before.
Before we get to that conversation about on the industry side, I want to stay with just the nanomedicine, nanoparticle research just for a minute, just to make sure I've got this. So nanomedicine is a lot more targeted and accurate in that you don't have to treat the whole body for a localized disease, and it's much more efficient form of treatment, and that space as the microgravity environment in space is makes the research side of it more efficient, that you get much more accurate structures, or you get to what you're trying to design in space, because on Earth you're working with gravity in the body, and you need to put these nanoparticles together the way you've designed them. Do I have that correct?
I think that's a pretty good summation. I would add a couple of things. The first thing that I would say to you is medicine is moving towards a more personalized solution. And the reason it's moving more personalized is because, say, for example, I give you the example of cancer treatment. Sometimes side effects are actually more difficult than the disease itself. Very often, a cancer patient is going to be more impacted by the side effects from the chemo drugs than they are from the actual cancer themselves. And so if we could actually find solutions that will allow us to be able to target gene editing, we're talking about emerging science that actually will allow us to change DNA, to rewire ourselves so that genetic diseases can be reversed. This isn't going to happen if you can't actually deliver specifically to a place. Osteoarthritis, you got to be able to get to the source of the inflammation, and you have to be able to interrupt that inflammation so that you can retain your cartilage, so that you don't have to have knee replacements, hip replacements, so that you have regenerative solutions that allow you to be able to essentially eliminate the need for those extreme options. And the more that we can take a therapy and actually deliver it directly to the source, then the more we can reduce some of those systemic side effects and also get better therapeutic outcomes much more quickly. Now, on the nanomedicine side, the advantage that we have is one of the amazing opportunities we have with low Earth orbit is, first of all, we're nano, because people are going to say to us, geez, can you do it cost effectively? And because we're a nano product, we can actually create tens of thousands of doses in a relatively small quantity of product. And also producing our product in orbit is pretty straightforward. So once we've actually designed the automation systems, all we need is really the platforms and the production environments that will allow us to be able to come up and come down.
Mhm.
So the personalized medicine is really exciting because it's offering up a lot of opportunities for folks to have better outcomes with a lot less side effects. And microgravity is allowing us to be able to produce a more homogeneous, a more uniform, and essentially a supercharged advanced product that will give us even better results than the results that we're seeing on Earth right now. So
Excellent.
think of the Earth product as, in entrepreneurial terms, you can think of the Earth product as kind of our minimum viable product, and our future space product as our more evolved and mature product down the road.
Excellent. Jana, as somebody who bridges both communities here, the pharmaceutical and space community, one thing Marianne mentioned was, when the two sides meet, the big question is, can we do this research cost efficiently? Mm-hmm. So what's the argument about, well, this is how much more expensive it is to do it on Earth, or less efficient? Does that come into play when you're saying the space environment can't be replicated in a cost efficient way on Earth? Is that the way you approach it?
So that's a great question. And, it's something that I like to talk about a lot, because today where we are, launch costs, even infrastructure to support this, it is challenging to think about closing an economic case. But what you need to remember is that we're talking about products that we can make in space that we can't make here on Earth. We're not making things that are incrementally better. We're really thinking about how we're going to change the paradigm of healthcare. And so when you think about, even in the industry itself, so I worked a lot in sort of the regenerative medicine side of things in my previous life before my space career. And people used to always talk about how you could never make a business that would be successful using a patient's own cells. And then we had things like CAR T therapy that came into being. That uses the patient's own cells, manipulates them. It's a very expensive and labor-intensive process. The distribution cycle is horrible. Money pours into that from venture capital because of the fact that it cures people. So when you think about what we're trying to do in microgravity, think about this as products that we can't really imagine yet today, but that we could make there that we can't make here. And when you can do that, the argument for cost kind of closes itself. And we have terrestrial examples showing us how business cases that people thought were not really economically viable, they close when the product is good enough to be able to offer a solution that doesn't exist today.
Yeah, and I would also add, Jeff, that when you're thinking about the types of products that we're working on at the molecular level, really we're talking about doses that can be produced very cost effectively as the price of up mass and down mass goes down. And once the actual production environments have been figured out, and I see from the chat, people are asking about Varda, they're asking about different solutions, whether it is perpetual stations like Axiom and Vast and other companies are working on. We have Varda, we have the Explorer company, and we're also working with companies that are just looking at perpetual platforms. Once that environment is in place and the economics have been established and the supply chain has been developed, then costs come down. And that's what we're preparing for.
Excellent. Another person in the chat also brought up, when you're making the economic environment argument for the space environment, how do you respond to people who say, well, can't we just simulate the environment some way?
I love that question. All right, I'll take that one first, Marianne, and then if you want to add. So we can simulate a very short amount of true microgravity on the ground through things like maybe a drop tower, maybe even a parabolic flight. But for sustained true microgravity conditions, there's only one place to get that, and that happens to be low Earth orbit. So I don't know, there's been a lot of work that's been done with simulated microgravity systems, especially on cell-based technologies. And the challenge there is that you're really just introducing shear forces and vectors on those cells as you kind of spin them, versus in microgravity, you're actually just removing gravity without introducing any other force to do that. So it's a pretty unique, and I have some slides too that when we get to those, I want to talk a little bit about sort of the differences in using not just space as a vantage point like we do for satellites now, but to access that true environment of microgravity.
I think
It's
the other
unique.
thing,
We can't do it here.
Yeah, the other thing that is very unique about microgravity, not only are we getting very unique results from production and assembly, but cells act differently in space. So we have many, many colleagues who are looking at things like cancer models, who are looking at stem cell research, who are looking at organoids, different types of things that, because they age differently in space, they're getting an opportunity to advance a product more quickly. I think what's important for your audience here today, because many of them may be on the defense side or the telecommunication side, the satellite side, and they might be saying, is this relevant? And what I would say is, if you have a perpetual platform that has any capacity to be multi-purpose for other things, then appreciate you might actually be a potential partner for us to be able to create an actual production or a product development environment that will help us to be able to access these very unique these unique moments in microgravity.
I want to move on to infrastructure and supply chain. Before we do, there was a really interesting question asked early on by one of our attendees here that I thought about too when we're talking about the importance of the space environment. I also assume it's really important to do this type of research in microgravity when you're thinking about the health of astronauts, right? Like, we're also putting people up in space. Is that also, I'm just curious, I was curious as well. Is that another application where, yeah, this is the only way that you would be able to do that?
So certainly there's benefits for exploration as well. And as we learn how to make things in that environment, sure, when you think about Moon, Mars strategies, make it, don't take it. Although I would kind of argue that when we have rockets like Starship coming online that can lift 100 to 150 metric tons, we probably are going to be less inclined to think about how we make everything in the environment, and we are going to be able to take things with us. So while there's benefits to future exploration and space travelers that can be applied with these technologies, really the focus is on leveraging low Earth orbit for benefit to life on Earth through the applications that we're talking about right now. The in-space manufacturing of both advanced materials and biomedical products, really, that's why, as I said before, I think we all know when we first got our cell phones, no one imagined that, today's cell phones would really be computers instead of phones, right? So we couldn't envision what that was going to look like until it got here. And the same, I think, is true for the products that we're going to produce in space, whether they're advanced materials or healthcare related. There are things we can't imagine we could have today that could really change the way we live.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Jeff, that we are already talking to the folks who are interested in astronaut health and folks who are doing long range space missions, because obviously living and working in those environments is really tough on the body. So we're also thinking about it in terms of how that translates to things like troop health, because our osteoarthritis application can also be used for joint trauma on the battlefield, because we can actually be used in extreme environments, as well as overuse injuries. And so there's lots and lots of, to Jana's point, expanded opportunities. Where it gets produced is really about making sure that we have the most advanced product, but how it gets used, I think the sky's the limit.
Mm-hmm. I want to address what I think is the most important question here, because we're talking about future space economy. And when we talk about utilizing infrastructure to support this application, we have to think about, in the United States, the largest industry by state in 40 out of the 50 states is the medical industry. So we're not just talking, this is a large industry with potential, lot of potential here for use cases in space. For cost efficiency, let's start with what kind of existing infrastructure are we utilizing? We talked about one, the ISS. Also, what can be leveraged, what kind of infrastructure needs to be built, what needs to be leveraged moving forward. And then after that, we can talk about a little bit about supply chain. But let me I'll start with you, Marianne, and Jana, I know you've got a lot of information here on this. So I guess, Marianne, set the table for us in terms of what existing infrastructure you're utilizing.
And I think it's important. I don't think we can emphasize enough the role that the International Space Station and the current space stations that are being utilized for this pioneering research, right? We had to validate the business case. We actually had to take the product up into low Earth orbit, produce it in low Earth orbit, demonstrate that there was a compelling reason to do so, and then start building the financial models, the economic models that would help us to understand how much do you have to produce to actually be profitable? What would that take? Because if you're going to build a chain of a supply chain, or you're thinking about what a production environment looks like, then you have to be able to answer some fundamental questions. And the ISS, for better or for worse, regardless of politics or whatever, the plain fact is that a huge amount of data, a huge amount of science, a huge amount of just foundational work has been done in that environment, which has proven the business case. But it has also advanced the technology, which has allowed us to actually think beyond just, can I have a science experiment? Can I actually create a business about this? And I think that's the perfect lead-in for Jana to be able to really kind of talk holistically about what that looks like. But from an individual startup company's perspective, I can actually have a credible conversation now, because I stand on the shoulders of every single researcher, individual who has participated, who has supported, and who's enabled this work to go on for as long as it has.
Excellent.
And I'll turn it over to you to sort of explain here the infrastructure, the supply chain, and also, some people in the audience want to know, like, what kind of space is needed, how long do you need to conduct research in space? So I'll turn it over to you. Do you have some slides?
I do, yes.
Okay, let's bring those up.
That might help to just, as Marianne said before, sometimes a picture is kind of worth 1,000 words. So really where I want to start, because when we were just talking about, more startup companies and in this space. So when you think about, no pun intended, in this growing emerging market, when you think about the current space economy, it's really satellites. But the reason that it's grown, and there are multiple startup companies and a lot of revenue being generated from that space economy, is because the infrastructure exists. So once we have that infrastructure, we can then think of all the applications and even all the things that we hadn't thought of before that we can do with that infrastructure. Same is true for what we're trying to do with the future space economy for emerging markets. Leveraging the vantage point is great, and that's the only place you can do that from a satellite perspective for Earth observation or communications. It's a unique environment. The microgravity environment is equally unique. And I saw a question in the chat as well about, the hard vacuum in LEO as a benefit over terrestrial vacuum chambers. Absolutely. We haven't even started to scratch the surface on what that looks like, or nitrogen-free environments, or for advanced materials, right? We're still just focusing on the physical properties. But when you think about what we can develop for additional markets in low Earth orbit, these are untapped. The ones that really leverage microgravity, we haven't really even scratched the surface. Everybody knows, the McKinsey reports, it's very robust in terms of what the projections for the space economy will be, as well as the in-orbit manufacturing markets by 2035. Now, there's going to be, to the point that Marianne made and that we're going to talk about, infrastructure that needs to support that. Just like I said, we don't have that on the in-space manufacturing side like we do on the satellite side. But you can imagine that the markets that are emerging are going to be every bit, if not bigger, than the markets that exist today. And just kind of really quickly, I wanted to really just drive home the point of what's different. When you asked the question before about, well, can't you just do this on the ground? And honestly, because space is hard and it's expensive right now, I often say, if you can do this in the lab down the hall, you should probably do that, right? But when you're really looking for the differences, and physical forces changing mean that we can do things like thin film and thin layer deposition at a nanoscale. We can create nanomaterials like what we're talking about with Eascra. We leverage all those differences that we see that sometimes, sure, are fundamental differences in physical forces, but how we leverage those and turn those into producing products that we can't produce today is really the focus. Biological systems, as Marianne mentioned, cell aggregation and cell signaling, gene expression, protein crystallization. Everyone's heard a lot about the work that's been done on the protein side, even the virulence of pathogens. Like sometimes when we think about synthetic biology and we want to use E. coli or systems like that, we may be able to come up with unique and novel compounds, or even increase production, or do things like the Eascra materials where they're more uniform as well. I really want to sort of focus on sort of what are we doing, right? Because when we talk about building markets, it really takes three things: infrastructure, capabilities, and applications. So as we think about the applications that are already starting to be developed, we're just scratching the surface. We're doing things like layer deposition for artificial retina, protein-based artificial retinas, Janus Base Nanomaterials, 3D printing of things that are, going to help us with peripheral nerve injury, crystallization. As I mentioned, there's a lot of work looking at crystals, both in the pharma side of things. So can you make a novel starting crystal that is a different active pharmaceutical ingredient than what you could make on the ground? Same for the semiconductor and even optical fiber industries. Can you make more pure, more perfect kinds of materials that will really help us to elevate things like quantum computing? Everybody wants to do quantum, but the holdback is we don't have the materials to be able to do it. Maybe we can produce those in space, and we're able to then push the industry forward. Disease models, as Marianne mentioned, obviously brain organoids, tumor organoids, even stem cell production, because of the fact that we see differences in cell matrix interaction, growth of cells, even how cells, they don't have to really turn on a lot of the genes that they need to stick to a dish or to hold their shape when they're on the ground. So when those are turned off, we get to see other pathways that we wouldn't necessarily see. There's been some great work on drug challenge as well, especially on the cancer side, looking at compounds in that accelerated environment and seeing a positive response really gives you a sense of you should continue to develop this on the ground because it's probably going to be pretty effective. So it's different from what we've talked about before in that let's go up and just find an answer to why something is different, but it's thinking about almost flipping that research model on its head and saying, not what did I learn that I can incorporate back down on the ground? Some of that is true, but what did I learn that I can do there that I can't do here that could allow me to produce these kinds of novel products? When we think about where we are today, as Marianne said, International Space Station, we wouldn't be here even talking about some of these early applications if we didn't have the benefit of accessing the International Space Station. And it's fantastic to think about commercial companies that will be developing future platforms. We have several, right, that are scheduled to have things up as early as 2026 and 2027, and by the end of the decade when the ISS is retired. This is really important for two reasons, not only to maintain US leadership, but also to maintain exploration research. And one of the things that we need to think about from a commercial space station perspective is it has to be viable and have sustained activity that allows it to stay in orbit in order for us to continue that exploration research. And sometimes when we think about this transition to commercial, I'm not sure that everybody really embraces or accepts the fact that we have to be commercially successful with things like these new markets, or else the space stations are not able to be maintained in low Earth orbit for anyone to do research, whether it's for us to do research on new applications that we can turn into products we can produce in space, or for exploration. So it's a critical component right now that, while the focus is on just using these new stations the way we've used a station before, we need to be thinking about that differently because it's a commercial model now. Along the way, what we have are access to new capabilities that are coming online that give us access to microgravity. So before we have space stations, we already have things like reentry vehicles. BARDA was mentioned earlier, right? Several companies are attempting Space Forge, for advanced materials, Dream Chaser. You've got, in addition to what we have right now that allows us to access a platform and vehicles that will allow us to access future platforms, we have a lot of vehicles that are starting to show up that will help us to build this market in a way that is kind of that stepwise transition that we talked about. We may not be able to fill a full Dragon capsule right now with manufacturing materials, but certainly these smaller vehicles that allow access and provide re-entry capabilities, those are going to be important throughout the history of this market as it develops. We're always going to need those, just like we're always going to need space stations. And in addition to the rockets and the re-entry vehicles that are coming online, we even have companies that are looking at putting platforms up that are fully autonomous, like Rogue Space or Alatar, right? So the landscape is becoming different as we think about where we're transitioning this marketplace to. And I can remember 10 years ago when I started in the space industry, I thought, what a great idea, like emerging markets in low Earth orbit. And I have to say, I transitioned to space because I heard the word innovation one too many times in pharma, biotech, and medical device. And when I saw science in microgravity, it just changed my whole perspective because you ask questions so differently that it truly is innovative. And so, but at the time I thought, we have the ISS and we're going to need to have like a commercial space station and that has the capabilities and even GMP capabilities to provide manufacturing. And then suddenly we started to see Axiom Space and then Starlab and Orbital Reef and Vast, Haven 1, all coming online, but we didn't have the applications. Now we have lots of applications. And as we're trying to make that transition over to those space stations, we also have an evolving landscape of vehicles that can help us to access that environment to do this. So, I kind of want to end with sort of for me, the take home is that the space race today is about economic dominance, right? It's who's going to control that next $1 trillion economy. And how do we stake a claim in the industries that will reshape the future? I don't know that we really have what we need today, but I know that the people who are willing to invest and to think about how they can support the growth of this industry, they're going to be in the winning position. And eventually, when we talk about global, world economy is global plus space, the companies that are still participating just terrestrially are going to have to try to keep up with the companies that are manufacturing those novel products in space. So you're going to see a big transition, but I think that the opportunity and some of the early concepts that we have really give us confidence that this is the right direction to go in. So I'm going to end there, and I'm certainly happy to talk more, but as you can see, we have a unique moment where we've got companies like Eascra demonstrating the benefit, and we also have infrastructure that's starting to develop. We need more, and we need a little bit more investment, but I think if we can put that in place, we're going to rival the satellite markets that exist today.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Jana. That was a really good overview of all of the infrastructure elements involved in the supply chain, sort of what is needed. And so thank you so much for that. I do have a couple of follow-up questions, and some of these were also put forward by some of our attendees. So, the common question is, we talked a lot about the ISS, and the ISS is set to be decommissioned at the end of the decade. And you've mentioned, some of the commercial industry space stations that are coming online. From your perspective, are you bullish on those options? Which ones do you feel are the most likely to happen? Are they all going to happen? Are we going to have enough real estate in space to really make this, to really have this market reach its full potential?
Jana, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll start. My hope is that we are building towards a future that looks very similar to what we have on the ISS today, right? And expands beyond that. Mm-hmm. When we first started thinking about the transition from ISS, there was a sense that it was always going to be, it's going to be ISS 2.0, and we're going to have state-of-the-art everything, and it's going to be bigger or better. We're even going to have facilities that are dedicated manufacturing facilities, right? With even GMP capabilities, so that we'll be able to produce things at scale. What we're seeing is that we're going to have a stepwise approach to that. We're not stepping off of ISS. ISS took 25 years to become what it is. We're not out of the gate, unfortunately, going to be just improving on where we are. We're going to have to build a little bit along the way. So when you ask, do we really have the real estate that we need? My answer would be not yet, but we also are still developing those applications in parallel. And it's almost like when you think about, manufacturing facilities on the ground, it's nothing for a biomedical manufacturing facility to be 30 or 60,000 square feet. We don't have anything close to that, even with all 4 stations. Should all 4 commercial space stations exist tomorrow, we wouldn't have what we needed to manufacture. And we probably, by the time we're in full commercial scale manufacturing, would need to have really dedicated modules that would be related to that manufacturing capability. But in some ways, glass half full, I always believe that everything happens for a reason. It's probably a good thing, because what we don't want up there is the 60,000 square foot manufacturing facility that we can only use 10,000 square feet of, right? Yeah. We need to build together. And so that's where even some of these smaller platforms, they will drop the launch cost. So the cost per kilo will go down. But it also gives us a really important piece that we don't have right now: iterative opportunities to access that environment. When you think about what it takes to really develop a product, for a biomedical product, 4 flights in 3 years is not enough, right? We need to be able to access that environment. Marianne and the team are very fortunate that they've had multiple flights to be able to do that. That's how you can see their progress. That's what we need to build, is the opportunity to have How much more analysis can we do on orbit? How can we leverage these platforms that we're going to have now that will lead us to those commercial manufacturing applications? How do we make them really effective for us to continue this discovery work and to continue to generate that proof of concept that will draw investment and industry over? Marianne?
From a commercial perspective, you're asking me about, what am I bullish on, right? And I think what's really important in this is think about the early days when folks thought about offshoring and actually creating a manufacturing environment that was across regional boundaries, across all sorts of different countries. Think about the utilization of Asia, Mexico, Canada for the auto industry, these sorts of things. Same thing with life sciences. And to a certain extent, I feel like we're in the same proof of concept, right? We're actually, when you think about taking things to low Earth orbit, I only have to go up like 236 miles, to get to low Earth orbit. In some ways, it's easier than putting things on a container ship or a plane and trying to fly it or transport it for thousands and thousands of miles. But when you ask Jeff, who's going to be the winner in this, we don't know yet, right? And so, from a CEO of a commercial company who is saying what's possible, in some ways, when I showed you the slide of how many people we partner with, the reason why is because space in some ways has been a very segmented environment. Everyone knows a little, and they know a little based on their particular part of the application, their area of interest. But the more you talk to people, the more you have conversations, there's a lot of translatable information that goes back and forth. So the more that we can have consolidated collaborative conversations with people who understand how these environments work, who have put platforms up for extended periods of time, and the more you have folks like us, we're customers. If you build, a great lab space but nobody rents it, that's a problem for you. So how do we actually really kind of think about how we can work together? So the folks who are most collaborative, I'm feeling most bullish about, because they're the ones who are understanding what I need, but are helping me understand how I can overcome some of the challenges in this environment. So the more collaborative the players, the more open to partnership, the more I'm saying, wow, this is a relationship that we can not only grow, build on, but actually is going to yield something really good in the future.
Yep. And I'm going to add one more component to that, because I think when Marianne said, who's going to win? So no one wins if we don't all win, right?
Yeah.
And I think that when you think about that concept, and I know even from my days in biotech and, pharma, trying to create emerging markets is hard. And you always need to support the wins of everyone who is helping to develop an emerging market in order for that market to take shape. And so when regenerative medicine and, the first sort of, hey, let's do tissue engineering and let's do stem cells, that was crazy, right? People were like, we're going to end the organ shortage. We're just going to bioengineer all the organs. Well, this 35 years later, we haven't figured out how to do that yet. We're still trying and we're getting closer. But what we spawned was an entire industry of cell and gene therapy and biologics and things that people could have never imagined. Same thing is happening here. I applaud everyone who has a success. And I think one of the things that's super important for us is the credibility, right? Because in the past, we've had a lot of people talking about things that sounded great, but really maybe weren't as realistic as they needed to be. And so we need to remain really credible we need to be very responsible about how we do this out of the gate, because really the first movers are going to define the landscape for everyone who comes behind them. So we have to do it well, and the win is a collective win. So we want to cheer each other on. We want to see more successes, because without the platforms, the vehicles, or the applications, no one wins.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
for those who asked about, well, we had a lot of people in the audience ask about your contact information. If you registered for this webcast, you'll be able to click on that registration link again, and you'll be able to watch us on demand and download the 2 slide decks that we showed you. And I believe they have your contact information on them. Is that correct?
correct.
And if we could maybe I'll bring the slides up and put up the contact information as you answer my last question here. I'm sorry to save this for the last 5 minutes, just next on my list. As you know, like the U.S. has maintained leadership in medical research for many, many years. In the current Trump administration, funding for scientific research is always an unknown. We never know what's going to happen, as we've seen in the news. Does that put this activity in space at risk? If so, like what are the consequences for U.S. space and medical research if we don't act on this and take advantage of this knowledge and these resources that we have coming up here in the future?
So
Yeah.
I'll start, Marianne, and then I'll let you finish this, because it's a very important question. And one of the things that I think everyone should be aware of is there's a lot of work already going on the Chinese space station, looking at things like advanced materials, alloys that can't be produced on the ground that can be used for defense or other applications, as well as aerospace and transportation. We're kind of focused on semiconductors. I think they're looking at materials that could be related more to national security kinds of efforts. There's work that's been done on stem cells. There's work on biomedical products, right? I think we need to be thoughtful about the fact that we have an opportunity to truly accelerate innovation within an industry. And maybe as the opportunities for us to show more about the proof of concept research that we've done become evident, even the money that it's going to be, or the funding that's going to come to the space industry, will help us to bridge that gap for what's happening on the ground. I remain optimistic that potentially we're not going to cut science across the board, and we're going to have some funding even come back on the NASA side. But I think collaboratively together, working with industry, this is a unique environment for pharma, biotech, and medical device for a lot of reasons. In addition to the innovation, things like intellectual property, right? The fact that you don't have to have a factory on the ground, so your green footprint just got eminently better, as well as you're competitively going to be way ahead. And so I think as we have the opportunity to help manage what's happening in terms of science, we really have a true opportunity to accelerate innovation.
So I'm going to do a big shout out to Ray Bawani, who's actually a very dear friend of ours, and someone that both Jana and I know and love. She was a Saudi astronaut on the private mission crew that Axiom sent to the space station. She's on today because I just saw her pop a question in the chat, and she was the one who produced our Janus Base Nanomaterials for the very first time and helped us make history. And, she is from Saudi Arabia. And I think what's important here is that, the International Space Station was an international effort. And I think that while the U.S. Really kind of led the way, I think in the future, what's going to happen is unless there's a sea change, then U.S. dominance in these areas will be eclipsed by other folks who are now becoming prominent players who see an opportunity. And so in the United States, we can give that away to other folks if we choose to do that. There are other folks who are waiting, who are ready to move things forward. And as a commercial company, I'm going to have to partner with the folks who are most committed to building these environments. And we're prepared to do that. Partner with wonderful, amazing, excited, and energized people who want to be part of this landscape. I am hopeful that the U.S. continues to invest in this area, because it has been so prominent in the past. At the same time, I also see the eagerness of the rest of the world. And so it remains to be a storyline that will be written in the next, 10 to 15 years.
Marianne, Jana, thank you both so much. It was great talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope we continue this discussion.